Hi, hello, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny, and I am very excited today to talk to you about everything I knit in 2024, except actually it's not everything I knit in 2024. If I'm being honest, as I put this kind of list, or pile rather, together, I decided to leave off basically all of the gift knitting that I did at the end of the year last year. I don't have those items anymore because they were gifts. Most of them were quite small accessories, and I don't have a lot new to say about them. I spoke about them quite recently in other videos, so I thought that that might not be the most exciting thing for either you or for me. So I've left those off, and I'm just going to focus on knits from earlier in the year, bigger knits, and some kind of accessory milestone knits, or knits that I feel like I have interesting things to tell you about. So that is where I am headed. I did want to do, I quite like the way that it's started to become a flag at the beginning of these videos that people talk about not comparing the number of knits, and trying not to feel that oh, you haven't knit enough, or oh, you've knit too much. And I've been watching a lot of these videos over the last week and a half or so and really enjoying them, and I like to think that I'm not prone to compare myself too much, but I definitely felt myself feeling a bit, oh my gosh, some people have done so much knitting, and maybe I haven't done enough knitting to warrant one of these videos. And I think that that is quite silly. So I kind of took a step back and had a bit of a think about that for myself, and decided that actually I did exactly the right amount of knitting for me. And I think there are kind of three reasons that it's exactly the right amount of knitting for me. And I wanted to share that with you just because, I think it's always worth having a conversation about, knitting is part of consumerism. We are buying things. We're always, buying yarn or spinning yarn and producing things, and that can be tricky. It can be a tricky conversation. So for me, this was exactly the right amount of knitting because, one, and this is very privileged, I always had knitting on my needles when I wanted to have knitting on my needles. Because of my health, I wasn't always able to knit when I wanted to knit this year, but when I wanted to knit and was able to knit, I always was able to do it. I always had yarn, I always had projects available. So that is the first reason that this is just the right amount of knitting for me. When I needed stress relief, when I needed a bit of mental health support, when I needed some of that meditative calm, it was always there for me to grab. And that's a really privileged position. That hasn't always been true for me in the past. So I feel really pleased and fortunate about that this year. The second reason that this is the perfect amount of knitting for me this year is that I didn't overstretch my budget. I'm occasionally horrified at how much I've spent on yarn, but I never spent more than I planned to, or more than I could afford, or more than I had sectioned off for that kind of spending. So that's the second reason. The third and final reason is that for me, this is a perfect number of items to wear and integrate into my wardrobe. I've been able to wear all of these things a lot, and that is kind of one of my goals with my knitting. I think I'm fairly balanced between being a process knitter and a product knitter, maybe leaning a bit more towards process, but it is important to me that these items cycle through my wardrobe and don't just go from sitting in my stash to sitting on my shelf as a finished garment. So those are quite personal. I'm not suggesting that those should be the metrics by which anyone else measures how much knitting they've done, but I think that that was really helpful for me to reflect on. So I wanted to share that before we got started. Okay, and I think that that is all the rambling that I wanted to do. So let's jump right in. And I have decided to approach this kind of by going through each item and telling you, I'm going to tell you obviously pattern and what yarn I used, but also how the items weren't held up, how much I've worn it, if I've noticed anything about the construction in particular that I wish I had done differently or would do differently, or in one case am planning to do differently, or to go back and alter. So that's kind of the approach that I'm going to take, and let's jump right in. Okay, so the first knit of the year is actually a bit of a cheat. I hope you don't mind, but this one I actually finished in 2023. This is the first of these videos that I've done, so I haven't had a chance to talk about this in a kind of retrospective way before, and there are kind of a few reasons that I thought it would be useful to talk about this knit, even though it is a cheat, I will admit. So this is the Adult Knit V-neck vest by Yarnspirations Design Studio, and I knit this for my partner. It's knit out of Cascade 220, their non-superwash, in the color Shire. I did make a few little modifications to this pattern. I knit the bottom part of it in the round, even though it called for being completely piece knit and seamed. To reintroduce just a little bit of that structure, I put a faux kind of Gansey type seam on the side. Other than that, I really didn't make very modifications except for obviously modifying it for my partner's height and general sizes, that kind of thing. But I thought that this was an interesting one to talk about for two reasons. The first one being the amount of wear that it shows, because I'm not very good at gleaning. I have to admit, I'm just not that fussed about fluff, about pills. Obviously, if it gets really egregious or is on a light colored sweater, then I take care of it. But I have been known to let that go for quite a while. And he wears this vest all the time. I'm really fortunate. I have a partner who really, really wears the things that I knit him. And he probably wears this, I would say 2 or 3 times a week, and has done since last December. So it's gotten quite a bit of wear. And it's showing a bit of pilling, but not too bad given, I think, not too bad given how much he's wearing it. So I just wanted to show you, it's not the easiest to see, but you can see a few little baubles. It's really concentrated under the arms. There you can see some of that. It's very much concentrated under the arms. It's showing almost no wear anywhere else. There, you can see that pretty clearly, I think. And not too bad on the back. And no wear there. So I'm quite pleased with that, actually. It's showing some wear, but in a kind of understandable way given how much actual wear it's getting. So that was the first reason I wanted to share this one. The second reason was that shortly after I knit this, my partner kind of gently told me that it was a little bit small. And it fits him quite nicely, I would say, but he just wished he had a bit more room, is how I interpreted what he was telling me. And I kind of said, oh no, do you want me to take it back and fix it? And he said, no, I like it the way it is, I'll definitely wear it, but I would love, the next one, because he would like me to knit more, which I am doing. But the next one, I'd like to be just a little bit bigger. And we kind of left it at that, and I offered every once in a while, out of kind of knitter's guilt, to take it back and try to add in some more width, is what I thought that he was talking about. And I did finally cast on a new vest for him very recently, and we were having a conversation about fit again, as I was deciding what size to knit and what kind of modifications I might be making. And so we pulled this out and we're talking about this again, and he told me for the first time that he wishes it was just like 2 or 3 centimeters, an inch and a half longer. I wish you told me that, because that's so much easier to do. So he told me this while we were on holiday and we were away, which was a little bit, frustrating for me as a knitter. Not frustrated at him, but just frustrated, because I was pretty sure, but not certain, that I still had some of that yarn left. So I came home, and pretty soon after we arrived, went and in my jet-lagged stupor found this yarn, and I do still have enough that this is going to be one of the first projects that I do this year. And I'm going to do just a little bit of sweater surgery, go in and take the sweater off, kind of, cut it just above the ribbing. I'll add in an inch and a half or so, have him try it on again, maybe hold up the ribbing, really make sure that we get it to the length that he wants it, and then graft it back together. So that's one of my early plans, and I think a really good lesson for me that I need to be more specific about measurements with my partner and really make sure that he and I are on the same page. I think this comes from him just not being too fussed about it, which is really, really lovely, but I want to make sure that it fits him super well. So that's the first item. This sweater is one of my absolute favorites. So this is the Autumn Alpine by Caitlin Hunter of Boyland Knitworks, And I knit this up in Rowan Valley Tweed in the colors High Force and Wold's Poppy, and I got both of those colors on sale and chose them together because I bought the blue first specifically. And I don't know if you can see, but it's got some red speckles in it, which to my mind is usually a sign of tweeds that are going to work well together if one has a bit of the other in it. And I was looking at quite a bit of kind of Eastern European folk art in particular, and just kind of daydreaming about those colors. And then they arrived and I started knitting and I was a bit nervous. And I'm not a color theory person, so I won't try to use too many of those terms because I will use them incorrectly, I'm sure. But I was just a bit nervous about the kind of contrast that they have. And that anxiety lasted a little bit until I finished the sweater. And then I put the sweater on and the anxiety disappeared. I'm so happy with how these colors work together. And I think this sweater in particular, this project, is a really good lesson for me with my knits going forward in terms of taking a little bit of a risk with color. I feel a bit silly talking about risk with regard to color because the stakes are low. You know, the stakes are quite low. It's just a sweater, it's just knitting. It would have been warm whether the colors were absolutely perfect together or not. It would have been wearable. But I guess I mean more than risk. I mean stepping outside my comfort zone a little bit. I do really like color, but I can tend to default to kind of what I consider my neutrals, colors that I'm really comfortable wearing. And red is not really in those colors, so this was kind of interesting for me in lots of ways. So a really good lesson going forward. I knit this like most of my knits, and I won't talk about this each time because it'll get repetitive, but I tend to like my sweaters at a tighter gauge than the patterns call for, and so I did knit this at a tighter gauge. This is a fingering weight yarn. The pattern calls for sport weight, so I knit a tighter gauge and went a size up, did the calculations to make sure that that would turn out with a sweater that I liked and the proportions of which I still liked and all of those things, and I think that worked out really well. I wear this a ton, and if you know, if I ever hesitate about wearing it, it's only because it's striking enough, I think, that if I wear it many times in a row to see the same people, it will be very obvious that I'm always wearing the same sweater. So that's the only thing I keep in mind about how much I wear this. The final thing to say about this, and I promise I won't ramble about every item as long as I'm talking about these first two. I think these first two are particularly meaty for me. There are things to reflect on. The final thing about this is that this sweater is so warm despite being fingering weight. And I couldn't find the details initially, but I've gone back and looked since and have confirmed that that is because this was a woolen spun yarn. The Rowan Valley Tweed is woolen spun, and I now know that I really like woolen spun. So that was a really, really good kind of positive learning experience with my knitting for me very early in the year. And the cuffs are just, the attention to detail in this pattern I think is really lovely. So that is a huge success. This vest is the See My Vest Chunky by Emily Baldwin. This is a free pattern. I didn't mention, but the vest for my partner was a free pattern as well. So both vests are free and really lovely patterns. I would definitely recommend them both. I added a faux seam on the side of this one as well, and otherwise followed the pattern more or less exactly, if I recall correctly. This is knit up in Rowan Colorscape Chunky in the color Northern Lights, which is the number 436, and that Rowan Colorscape is one of my most serendipitous yarn purchases. I purchased that in a charity shop many years ago and was really, really excited. I've never had such a good yarn fiber crafts related find at a charity shop, but so I bought the yarn. I was really excited about the colors. I like the colors, but then it sat in my stash for a while because I wasn't sure what to do with it. I don't knit with a lot of color changing yarn, a lot of variegated yarn, and I don't knit with a lot of bulky yarn. And I didn't have quite enough to make a sweater, and I just wasn't sure what to do with it. This vest was the perfect thing to do with it. I'm really pleased that that yarn is no longer sitting in my stash. It's now in my wardrobe. That said, I haven't gotten a lot of wear out of this. And the reason I haven't gotten a lot of wear out of this is probably the item that I've worn the least of everything I knit last year. And I think that it is because I get cold arms. It's just a bit too in between seasons for me. There isn't a lot of weather where it's cool enough that I want to layer over top of my dress or jeans and a t-shirt or jeans and a long sleeve shirt or something like that. There isn't a lot of weather that's cold enough for that, but not so cold that I don't want a full sweater, a full jumper that covers my arms. So that's the reason I haven't got a lot of wear out of this. I think that the solution to that, though, is more knitting, because I very much intended, when I really picked back up knitting again about 12 or 13 months ago, to knit myself some cardigans. I don't really have any cardigans in my wardrobe right now, and I, would like to knit some. I'd like to try out that construction and find a way to get some cardigans into my wardrobe, and I have found a few patterns that I'm really excited about. So I think it's just a question of getting to some cardigans, and then I think I will be much more of a vest person. If I could wear this as another intermediate layer and then have a nice cardigan over top to cover my arms, then I'd be extra toasty warm, and that would make this a lot more useful for me. So this one's a bit of a test piece, and see if cardigans make this a more frequent reach for me. This is another big success for me this year. This is the warm-up sweater by Espace Tricot, and I knit this out of some Istex Plotilopi that I had in my stash for a very long time and had not used because I was scared. I had never knit with any unspun yarn before this project, and I'm a quite tight knitter, and had heard that being a tight knitter can make the yarn more prone to break, or the way that you use the yarn when you're a tighter knitter can be a bit more difficult with unspun yarn. Unspun fiber, I guess. It's not really yarn yet, is it? So that put me off a little, and I was nervous. But I had a sweater's quantity of this, and I had a kind of second sweater's quantity actually, because my mother bought both myself and her a sweater's quantity of Plotilopi when she was in Iceland several years ago now. So there was motivation to knit it because the yarn was there and it was a gift, and it's an exciting gift. And my mom originally thought that she was going to be a big knitter as well, and then realized that it's not so much her thing. She likes sewing and baking and gardening and other things more. So I inherited that yarn as well. So this year was the year I decided to just go for it, and if it didn't work, it didn't work. But it was better to try than to just have it sitting as something that I was scared of in my stash. And I'm so glad that I did, because it worked really, really well. So this sweater was a real pleasure that way. I had 3 colors, but I decided to knit in solid gray because I thought that would be really flexible in my wardrobe, and I didn't want to deal with both color work and scary yarn. I didn't need to be worried about that, but it's turned out really well anyways. And the thing that I like about this sweater the most is these sleeves, which came out of necessity. I did not do that. I had not planned to do that, but I started to run out of this mid-gray that I had planned to knit the whole sweater in. I was aware that I was going to run out by the time I finished the body, so I was able to, divide it out based on weight for the sleeves, and I kind of planned, as I was going, I kind of planned, oh, okay, this might be a good place to stop, and I stopped kind of just below the elbows and moved into the lighter color. And I love that. I don't think I wasn't planning. I would not have done that if I didn't run out of yarn. And I'm so glad I ran out of yarn out of the mid-gray color, because this, I think, makes the sweater a bit more special and a bit more fun. So I wear it a lot. And My partner in particular, I don't know why, but he really likes this one. Every time I wear it, he's like, you know, those sleeves look so good. I think he remembers how, you know, how much angst there was as I was deciding how to solve the problem, because I came up with a few options initially. There are some things that I don't love about this sweater, however, and I again played with the gauge and played with some of the raglan increases, because after playing with the gauge I was worried that the arm tie was going to start too early for me, and I was worried that the sleeves were going to be too small based on the ways that I played with the gauge. So I want to be clear that the issues that I have with this pattern probably aren't the pattern's fault. They're my fault. I played with it in a way that you're not supposed to, right? Like you can only expect the sweater to turn out absolutely perfectly if you knit it at gauge, and I didn't. But what I don't love about this is the neck fits really well. The back neck shaping, the short rows keep the neck really, really comfortable. It doesn't feel like it's choking me, but I feel like it's riding up at the back sometimes when I wear it. I've double checked. You can't tell. Visually it doesn't look like it's riding up, but it just feels like it's riding up a little bit. And if I had more of this yarn, and if it was an easier yarn to frog, then the Plötulopi, the unspun, is not terribly easy to frog. If those two factors were different, I would go in and take off the hem and add in some short rows at the bottom, which I wish I had done initially, but I don't have enough yarn, so I'm, you know, it's not the end of the world. I still wear this. It's just something that kind of nags me in the back of my mind once in a while when I'm wearing this. So that's something to keep in mind, I think. If you were knitting this pattern, honestly, it probably will be different if you're knitting it at the right gauge, but it's just a good reminder to me, I think, to always put on a sweater before I do the ribbing, even if I know I'm happy with the length at that stage, just to really kind of pay attention to how that feels on my front and on my back, and consider doing some short row shaping, adding in a few rows there. So a good lesson learned, and certainly not the end of the world. I still wear it a lot. This next sweater is one of the patterns that was the biggest challenge for me this year, and one of the processes and finished objects that I'm proudest of and most excited about from this year. So this is, I was originally calling it my Invermere sweater after the town in the Canadian Rockies where my grandparents lived and where I used to see bighorn sheep quite regularly, but I have just kind of slowly switched over to calling it just my bighorn sheep sweater. So I guess I'm calling it my bighorn sheep sweater, and this is one that I did completely from scratch on my own. I'm very proud of it, and I knit this out of West Yorkshire Spinners Jacob Fleece DK, or Fleece Jacob DK. I apologize, I could never remember the right order for that name. But that is a range, all Jacob sheep fleece, and the range is entirely undyed. So there are these two colors, which is the brown black and the ecru, and then there are, I believe, two shades of gray as well. And I'm a really big fan of this yarn. It has worn like iron. I wear this a ton, and there's just no pilling. I wear it so much, and there's no pilling. I am quite easy on my clothes, probably, so we'll see. I will update you in future if that changes, but really, really pleased with it, and it smells really sheepy, and it's a very, very rustic yarn. So if that's your kind of thing, I would recommend this. I posted a kind of process video of making this sweater, and coming up with the motif and making the motif fit the increase rate that I wanted, especially, and frogging a lot and reknitting and all of that kind of stuff. And lots of you were very kind to watch that and comment on it. So thank you so much for that. I will link that video below in case you're interested. And many of you commented on that video that you would be interested in knitting the pattern, and I'm so grateful for that. And also I'm sorry. I feel a bit guilty that I haven't done that yet. It's been quite a while. I published that I released that video in the spring, maybe in the early spring, and it's been quite a while. So apologies for that. If I'm honest, the reason that I haven't gotten around to that yet, I'm very excited about grading a pattern it will be the first time that I grade a pattern. I'm very excited about it. I'm interested in that kind of thing. I'm not too intimidated about the math, but I have let myself become, I think, just a little bit paralyzed about wanting to make sure that the pattern is really good and works really well for everybody. And I think I've let myself become a bit too worked up with trying to anticipate every modification that people might want to make and make sure that the sweater pattern can accommodate all of those modifications. And that might just not be possible. This is, you know, an element of my personality which I abut against fairly regularly, and I think I probably just needed to take a step back from it and come back to it with fresh eyes and a more realistic understanding of what a sweater pattern can be. It cannot be all things for all people. So I do need to go back to that and just make sure that it's a well-graded pattern that's going to fit as close to, you know, this fit on me for every other body as possible, as much as possible, and make sure that it's size inclusive and all of those good things. So that is definitely my intention. I'm not sure when I will get to that exactly, just because, you know, life is very busy, but that's my little apology for not having done that yet. So that is still coming, but the sweater itself, I luckily have been able to separate from my feelings about not having done the pattern, and I'm really just pleased with it. The only thing that I would change about this at this stage is that I thought I was making the sleeves quite long when I first cast this off, and they've ridden up over time. The sleeves have just ridden up a little bit, and as I'm moving around, the sleeves ride up a little bit. I think it has to do with them being a bit thinner towards the bottom, so I would make the sleeves just a little bit longer. I obviously don't care that much because I haven't gone back in and lengthened them, even though that would be very, very easy to do. So fairly minor complaint, and otherwise I'm just really, really pleased with it. So that's the sweater with some short row shaping, and I'm really happy with the fit. It's also so warm because it's DK and color work. It is my thickest sweater that way, probably because of that double thickness. So I get a ton of wear out of this. And it smells, one thing to say about this yarn, I guess, if as I'm recommending it to people, is that it smells quite sheepy even though it's been washed. And I really love that. My partner really teases me about it when he hugs me when I'm wearing this. He says that I smell like a sheep. I think that's a great thing because it smells like a clean sheep, you know. It's been washed, it's just sheepy, but that is, I guess, something to know in case you're interested in this yarn. My next finished object is in a very similar color to the brown black Jacob yarn, but this is exciting in its own way because it's hand spun. This is a Zwartless sheep fiber that I hand spun. It is my second ever hand spun, and I just love it so much. So this is, I knit this up in the Simple Thing shawl scarf pattern by Melina Brell, apologies, no D, Melina Brell, and I have gotten a ton of wear out of this. I wear this around the house a lot just to kind of keep in heat around my neck. I feel like I lose a lot of my heat from my neck and from my kind of upper chest, not even upper chest, from my collarbone area here. So I wear this a lot around the house. I also wear this tucked into coats to make sure that I'm not losing that heat there. And I wear this underneath bigger shawls or scarves. I can often feel like a bigger shawl or scarf is really lovely and warm, except for it's kind of impossible to get a perfect seal around your neck, isn't it? And I can just feel heat escaping. So this has been probably one of the most useful things that I knit this year, and is a good lesson for me going forward with my knitting in two ways. The first is that wearing handspun yarn gives me so much joy and is really special, and is probably part of why I reach for this so much. The second is that small scarves, tiny scarves, are definitely something that I find useful. I know that not everyone finds them super useful, but for me, it's clearly a staple, an everyday staple, and just, you know, I intend to knit more of them because they're clearly something that I wear and enjoy. This year I also knit my first ever pair of socks. I have to admit that before this year I was just not terribly interested in knitting socks, and I got bit by the bug this year, and I'm such a convert. I really get it and I really love it. On the video where I first talked about these, one of you, and I apologize, I don't remember who exactly said it, but one of you mentioned that you love sock knitting because it's kind of mindless, easy, you know, easy knitting, and then magic when you turn the heel, and then easy fun knitting again. And I think about that every time I'm knitting socks now, because I think that that is so true. It's, you know, fun, so portable, and really easy while you're doing the cuff and the foot, and then it really is just magic the way that that heel gets turned. So these are fairly standard top-down socks. This is the Basic Ribbed Socks by Kate Atherley, a really great pattern. I would recommend it as a first-time sock knitting pattern for sure. And, you know, I have no complaints. I'm really pleased. I think Kate Atherley is the bee's knees. And this is knit out of Kremke Sole Wool Edelweiss Classic 4-ply, which is a non-superwash wool. And I bought it. It is a sock yarn. It is designed for knitting socks, but it is non-superwash. And the polyamide or nylon, I'm afraid I don't remember which it is, but the synthetic component, which is 25%, is recycled. So really, you know, those are the reasons I bought the yarn, that I purchased it, was that it was non-superwash, which is my general preference, and that it had recycled synthetic in it for durability, and it's really held up. I'm really pleased with them. I did Mel from Mel Makes Stuff has a sock pattern where she models kind of and, you know, patterns out for you ergonomic toes for your socks, where one toe is slightly more, one toe side is more sloped than the other, and so you end up with, can I hold both of these up? Sorry, I'm wearing a dark sweater, which is not the most useful for holding up dark items. So you end up with kind of a right foot and a left foot for your socks. And I decided to do that to the toe, so I made that as a modification to the Kate Atherley pattern, because I often wear through the toes of my socks first. And some of you commented, I think really, I hadn't considered that that might take some of the pressure off one side of the toe, but it also means that you can't swap the socks back and forth to kind of distribute that pressure evenly, or that tension evenly on both sides of the toe. So that's really interesting. I have been wearing these socks a lot, particularly around the house, but I have to admit I used to be a really big walker, and for health reasons I'm not walking nearly as much this year, so I'm just being a bit gentler on my socks in general, and these are not showing any interesting wear yet. So I still definitely, I will come back if I have anything to update in terms of the ergonomic toe and whether that helps or not. I do also now have at least one pair of socks that doesn't have that ergonomic toe, and I plan to knit more so that I can kind of report back on how useful I found that. But so far, there's a bit of, these are just washed, so they've got a little bit of fluff just because I washed them. But I don't know if you can see, there's like a little tiny bit of maybe felting on the very surface there. I don't know if that's going to be visible, but otherwise these socks are holding up so well. So very pleased with the yarn and very pleased with the pattern. And my next finished object, I'm reverting to my usual way of speaking. The next item that I want to show you from my previous year of knitting is another pair of socks, and my second ever pair of socks, and the only other pair of socks that I have completed up to this point. And these are the women's cable anklets by the Spool Cotton, and this is a vintage pattern from the 1940s. I knit this as part of a kind of video essay about Virginia Woolf and Virginia Woolf's knitting that I made over the summer, and these socks are really special to me, partially because of that video, and you know how much fun I had making it, and how meaningful it was to me, and how meaningful it was that so many of you were so positive about it. So thank you for that. I am definitely in the process of making more kind of literary themed knitting videos. But to focus on these socks for now, this is again made out of the Krumke sole wool. I did not mention that those socks were in the color navy, even though to me it really looks like a deep purple. But the color is called navy, and this is the color warm orange or burnt orange. Did I write that down? Warm orange. It's the color warm orange, which is color code 408. And I'm really pleased with these as well. Because it was a vintage pattern, there was only one size, which I think that it was, the main pattern section was 70 stitches. And I found those a bit tight. I have quite a high arch, I'm learning. It's interesting the way that sock knitting kind of teaches you things about your feet that you didn't necessarily know. So I have quite a high arch, which means that things that fit me on the foot or on the ankle are sometimes hard to get over my heel. And so I changed the pattern slightly and cast on 77 stitches, so an extra repeat of the cable pattern. I'm giving you details about this because this is another free pattern. It's just available online, and with a whole host of other sock patterns from the 1940s. I think I could very happily probably knit nothing but 1940 sock patterns for the rest of time and be pretty cheerful about that, because lots of them look like lots of fun. So I did cast on a little, some extra stitches to accommodate my arch, and that worked really well. These are much more comfortable getting on and off. They're maybe just a little bit looser than the Kate Atherley socks, and I think I like the fit of the Kate Atherley socks just a little bit more. This pattern probably would have been served for me by having kind of 73 or 74 stitches rather than 77, but because of the cable pattern, that wasn't possible. So not a perfect fit, but I still wear them a lot. They're just not quite as comfortable for me inside shoes, just because they're a little bit looser. So a bit more of a home sock for me, but I wear them around the house a lot, and every time I wear them, I'm really cheerful, both because of the kind of video and you know, thematic content that these socks are associated with for me, but also because of their color. They're just really cheerful and fun, and when it's been so dark and there's so little daylight, these have been really nice to wear around the house. Bustling right along, my next piece from this year is a self-drafted hat that is again made out of hand-spun. And I don't have a lot to say about this. I cast on 120 stitches and did 1 by 1 rib for kind of, I think it was kind of 8.5 inches or so before I started to do crown decreases. I used up absolutely every last, not even meter, I used up every last centimeter of this yarn in this. I wanted it to be as long a hat as possible. My hand spun was probably coming in at a kind of DK. I thought it was more of a DK at the time based on my wraps per inch, but I wonder if I was pulling the wraps per inch too tightly and maybe it was more of a worsted. I am still very much very new to spinning and all the technical elements that come with spinning. But I wanted to talk about this because it was such a success. I wear this all the time, and like the autumn Alpine sweater, I think that this hat is a really good reminder to me to go with color, and that I do wear color a lot. I don't know why I don't reach for it initially in terms of my yarn purchases all the time. But I am going to try to do more of that, because when I do reach for it and I do knit with it, it gets a lot of wear and brings me a lot of joy. You know, the orange socks, the green hat, the bright red color work. So a good lesson for me that way, and just, you know, another joyous hand spun, hand knit item for me. So kind of, going into 2025, more bright colors and hand spinning and knitting with the hand spun. Okay, and my final item for today is one that is again just such a success from this year. I feel like I've had quite a good year of knitting. I'm really pleased with most of the things that I've made. But this one was such a good way to round off the year of knitting for myself. Certainly I did lots of gift knitting after this, but this is the last thing that I knit for myself. And this is the Hesper Shawl by Savory Knitting by Amy Christoffers, and I love this. I'm so pleased with this. I knit this out of Woolly Knits British wool, the 4-ply, and I knit it in the colors natural light natural gray, and jet black. What was it? Light gray natural and jet black. I held them double because this pattern is again knit for a sport weight, and the Woolly Knit 4-ply is a fairly light 4-ply, I think, so I held it double and knit the whole pattern at a DK, so it is extra squishy and extra dense. It has meant that the shawl is fair, it has a fair weight to it, but I love it, and I am wearing it a lot around the house, and I've been wearing it out, and just, I'm really, really pleased. I knit this basically exactly to pattern, except for the border. I really like that this pattern includes, it was a really well written pattern. There previously were some issues with the charts, but she's since updated the charts, so it's a really easy, accessible pattern. This was a first mosaic knitting pattern for me. The color work is all mosaic knitting, and I found it a really good introduction to that. It was, fairly intuitive, so really lovely that way. I'm really pleased. I really recommend the pattern in general. But one thing that I like in particular about this pattern is that at the end, it kind of invites you to put your own spin on the shawl. It offers a couple of options for what you might do with the border, but it kind of opens the door also for doing your own thing. And so I played around a little bit and ended up deciding to scale down the kind of main motif, and I scaled it down to exactly 50%. It does look a little bit different, the motif at 50%. I found that I could get it down to 2/3 and it would look more or less the same, but at 50% it does look a little bit more squat, and I wasn't sure of that initially, but this was another one where I was a bit in my head about it and maybe overly critical while I was actually knitting and while I was casting this off. But basically as soon as I cast it off and took a step back from it and put it on, my misgivings or reservations about the kind of border that I had made completely disappeared, and I just love it, and I'm just happy with it. And it gives me a little bit of extra joy, I think. The same way that I like wearing the hand spun, I think I like wearing something where I've made some kind of alteration that's a bit me, whether that's in color or in this case with a little bit of a design change, a little bit of a design modification at the end. So this was again a real success, and it is just enormous. I've been keeping it, even when I'm not wearing it, I've been keeping it kind of over the back of the couch so that I see it all the time and can pull it down over my shoulders all the time, and it's getting a lot of wear. I am definitely planning to knit another one at some point. I think I would have very happily cast on another one as soon as I cast this one off, but I need a little bit more variety than that. I know that I need a little bit more variety than that, so I'm not letting myself cast one on right away, but that is definitely something I would like to do. And that is everything that I wanted to talk to you about. So those are kind of all of my significant knits, I guess, from 2024. It's been such a good year of knitting. It's been a year of lots of learning curves for me, which I have really liked and have gotten a lot out of, both in terms of literal items, but I think I've just gotten a lot of kind of mental and emotional fortitude out of that kind of, learning curve that you can embark on when you want to with knitting. I think that that's one of the things that I value most about knitting, that it can be comforting and entirely in your comfort zone when you want it to be, and then when you're ready for a little bit of a challenge, there's always something out there to challenge you. There's always some new technique to try or some new way to do something that you've done before. So a really, really positive year for me, and I hope for you as well. I hope that whether you are filming one of these videos or not, you've had a chance to reflect on your knitting a little bit and that it has given you some joy. It's definitely been positive for me. So thank you so much for being with me here. I wish you a very, very happy 2025 of knitting, and hopefully see you soon.